Good afternoon to all. Horribly hot day. We will survive. Your Excellency, Dr. Vice Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the State of Palestine,
Masanur.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Catherine okay, Secretary of Africa for Africa and the Middle East of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ibrahim Al-Sadeh, Ambassador of Palestine in Brazil. Other authorities present here today, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great satisfaction that I welcome you, Dr. Sahin, to the Rio Branco Institute for a lecture for students of the Diplomatic Training Course on your home country, the State of Palestine. For a lecture, of our students. As most, if not all of you already know, the Palestinian people have suffered greatly since 1947, the United Nations decision in 1947 to partition their lands, hoping to create two states which should coexist, or should have coexisted, in peace, Israel and Palestine. This was not to be. Nearly 1 year later, the Nakba, the forced removal of Palestinians from their homeland, 20 years later, after the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel laid claim to most of the land reivindicated by Palestinians, which even before then had been progressively and had seen progressive and unchecked invasions and violations by Israel. The subsequent and recurring struggles of the Palestinian people against occupation continued to devastate their cities, their refugee camps, their families, their housing, and their livelihoods in the lands that should have been theirs. The Arab League in 1974 recognized the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And in November of that year, the UN General Assembly granted the PLO a special observer status, which lasted until 1988, when Palestine declared its independence. This situation lasted until 2013, a period which involved repeated internal conflicts in Palestine itself and divisions, and also the continued Israeli aggressions, when the United Nations finally recognized the state of Palestine. In spite of this, the strife, fighting, and deaths raged on, with repeated aggressions to the Palestinians and their fragmented homeland. In 1993, the Oslo Agreements were signed and hailed, in which Israel recognized that the PLO was a legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, under the condition that it recognized the state of Israel and its right to live in peace. The PLO also pledged to refrain from terrorism and accept resolutions 242 and 339 of the UN Security Council. Subsequently, the Oslo Agreements were repeatedly violated, and fighting and destruction continued to haunt and devastate the Palestinian homeland. The Israeli occupation continued in a never-ending repeat of events, deaths, attacks that culminated in the most recent war that started in late 2023. Total destruction of infrastructure, homes, shops, hunger, starvation, and death of countless children and adults continue to rage on while the international community is immobile. I will stop here, where I'm sure that Dr. Sahin will certainly bring us more information on the latest ceasefire negotiations, which just yesterday, once again, was highlighted by Israel. The two-state solution seems to be an ever-dissipating mirage in the desert. Your presence and speech here today, Dr. Sahin, will certainly have a lasting impact on our students. Thank you for joining us. I will now give the floor to Ambassador Sergio Blacci, my good friend, who would also like to share a few words with us before.
Thank you very much. Mr. Costa, Director of the Cuban Institute, Minister Al-Bekin Shaheen, Ambassador Ibrahim Zegan, Palestine. I just would like to just maybe say a few words about the context of Minister of State Al-Bekin's visit to Brazil. She's here for the fifth round of political consultations with Palestine. And yesterday she had those consultations with our Secretary General, and she was also received by the Foreign Minister, on which occasion she also signed, along with the Minister, a protocol updating our rules with regard to these political consultations because the previous protocol had taken place prior to Brazil recognizing the state of Palestine in 2010. So these two events so far have been, I think, highlights of the visit. And this is the context in which we held our consultations, which of course touched upon the crisis that we are witnessing now in Palestine and in the Middle East generally. And also, I think, was an occasion for us to exchange views on the various events that are very relevant to the conflict at this particular juncture and the actions that our country, Brazil, has been taking with regard to its position regarding the conflict, beginning in this latest escalation on the 7th of October 2023, the actions of the Security Council, the United Nations in support of Palestinian membership, full membership of the United Nations, the initiatives in the International Court of Justice, both supporting the initiative on the issue of genocide, but also with regard to an opinion that has already been put out by the ICJ with regard to Israeli practices in the occupied territories and the fact that Israel has been occupied for a long time, which the court itself determined that is illegal and should be terminated. I mean, among other measures that Brazil has been undertaking, political measures in support of a resolution of this conflict based on the two-state solution, which we have always uh, reiterated. So I think, I mean, I don't want to keep you from longer from Dr. Rebecca Shaheen's lecture, but I just wanted to set the context in which her visit takes place to our country.
Good afternoon, and I'm very humbled and privileged to be with you today. I'm a university professor myself, so it's always good to be amongst students and in academic environment. Thank you, Your Excellencies, for the very warm welcome and the introduction. Today I come to you with a lot of pain in my heart. As a Palestinian, it pains me to keep talking about the plight of Palestinians, and I have been doing this for a long time. The plight of Palestinians and the pain and the agony and the struggle did not start recently, and it did not start October 7th, as you have very clearly mentioned. This started with the division of Palestine, when a land, supposedly a land without a people, was given to a people without a land. But that land had my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents in that land. And they were a thriving community. We had a railway station, we had cinemas, we had stores, we had photography, we had artists. And relatively speaking, that community was more advanced than the communities in the neighboring countries. So a land without a people is a real myth because the people existed in that land. And we are a proof of that because we are the descendants of the people who were in that land. However, the division of 1947 planted the seeds of the problems to be encountered by Palestinians for many, many years, and today for over 7 decades. In 1967, Israel occupied the rest of Palestine as we see it today, and it started having control over all of historic Palestine. This meant that my generation, that was born a bit earlier than the 1967 occupation and onwards, everybody was born under occupation and experienced nothing but a brutal occupation. And for those who can imagine what occupation looks like and what oppression people live under when they are occupied, they can also imagine the kinds of challenges that you are faced with. And I can tell you that in a nutshell, occupations are very ugly and you cannot beautify them no matter what. No occupation is a beautiful occupation, and no oppressed people will embrace occupation. And international law affords people with the right to struggle and fight against the occupation in whatever means they have. For us Palestinians, some of us opted the violent way, and some of us, especially the Palestinian Authority and the official line, is non-violence. Our main tool is international law and nothing else but international law. But to that end, there are obligations by Israel, obligations by the international community to ensure that that international law is complied with. However, before we get to the international law bit, I want to say that Gaza today, I want to give you a synopsis of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. Gaza today has been under this brutal genocidal war waged by Israel for the past 16 months. And please imagine for a second what it means to be bombarded day and night, to see all your communities obliterated, to see your family members slaughtered, massacred, to see your schools destroyed, to see the healthcare system gone, having no services, living in tents. Can you imagine that few weeks ago, people who were sleeping in tents were taken by the water from the sea. The tides took people and their mattresses to the water, to the sea. And in the middle of the night, parents were looking for their children with no electricity. They were searching for their children in the sea, in the water. And this is winter time. Can you imagine what that does to the siblings of the children in the water? What it does to the parents searching for their children? Can you imagine what it does to children who have been out of schooling for almost 2 years now? Schooling age, when their time has to be spent in schools, getting socialized in the good things about life, in the good values they have to live with. But instead, they are witnessing all these atrocities. What will this give those children for the future? What will this, how will it affect the mental health of these children? And if these children don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, to see a light that gives them a glimpse of a better future, what will happen to these children? What will happen to the 20,000 children who became orphaned in Gaza in the last 16 months? Orphaned. Some lost both of their parents. Some lost one of the parents. Some lost most of their siblings. What will happen to the children who lost their limbs? One, two, three, four limbs. We need to think of people who have not been fed properly for the last 16 months. No food, no water. Food, water were weaponized. And using food and water as tools of war is a crime. And it continues to be used. So on Gaza, the situation is devastating. It is catastrophic. It is a humanitarian crisis, and it is beyond comprehension. It is unconscionable and something that the human mind cannot grasp. But we continue to see it unfolding. And that's the problem. The problem is continuing to seeing these atrocities while some of the people around the globe, the governments around the globe, are either silent or they have been silenced or they would say something about it, like Brazil, that has an unwavering support to the plight of the Palestinians. But in general, the statements coming out from all the countries around the globe and the decisions and the resolutions by the United Nations did not deter or stop the genocide. The genocide is continuing. And only last night, while we slept and thought everything was nice and moving in the right direction, we woke up to the horrible, horrible news. More than 1,000 Palestinians were either killed or injured last night alone, with airstrikes on all over Gaza. 1,000, mostly children. And if you've seen the horrific pictures coming out of social media, you would wonder what is happening to this world and how we are failing humanity in this world. We're failing it big time. The West Bank is not spared. Parallel to what is happening on the Gaza Strip, we have also the West Bank being attacked ferociously by Israel. And the attacks are starting with the camps. And the camps have a meaning for Palestinians. They symbolize refuge. And when Israel attacks camps, it's sending us a message that we want to erase the refugee issue. We want to erase the presence of refugees. But what is happening is you're bombing camps. The refugees already residing in those camps are displaced again for a second or a third time, and they are becoming refugees elsewhere. So the refuge is continuing. No matter what Israel does, the refugee problem remains because these refugees have a refugee status, and that status cannot be erased by destroying their camp. Their plight and their struggle will be exacerbated. That's the only thing that Israel achieves by destroying these camps. Besides the camps, Israel continues with its human rights violations in all facets of our lives. If you take all the human rights any individual should enjoy, and you come to a Palestinian and you do a cross check, every single one is violated. If your right to worship, your right to education, your right to health, your right to movement, your right to anything you can think of is violated by an occupier state of Israel. And it has been violating those rights since day one of the occupation. And it continues to violate with impunity. And it is this impunity that has gotten us where we are today. Because had there been accountability measures on an occupier state as per international law, we would not have reached this stage, and Israel would have been stopped in its attempts to act as a state above the law and to start acting as a state under the law, just like any other state on this earth. Because if any other state did what Israel has been doing to us Palestinians, the whole world would have been up on its feet. And we've seen it elsewhere, whether in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, you name it. Wrongdoing, the world is up on its feet. But when it's about Israel and its wrongdoings, Nobody dares. Nobody dares because of um, the Israeli lobby all over the world, because of the guilt feeling about the Holocaust. And the Holocaust was atrocious. It was brutal. It should never, ever happen to anybody. And we acknowledge that. But we had nothing to do with it. It wasn't us Palestinians who committed that, but we are paying the price. And to say to Israel that what you're doing is wrong is not anti Semitic. It is just telling an occupier state that its acts are in defiance of international law. That's all. And saying that should not be considered anti Semitic. Do you know that today in Israel there are 64 discriminatory laws that discriminate against non Jews? 64. If you are a non Jew, you are under those laws. Those laws apply to you. And again, imagine if one of those laws was in any other country. Again, the whole world will be upside down. And imagine if any one of those laws was in an Islamic country. Then, God forbid, the hell will break loose because, you can't do that. But when it comes to the occupied state of Israel, it is okay. Today, they have a law, I'm sure you all have heard about it, um, about UNRWA, that UNRWA cannot operate in the occupied territories. And you know that saying that means that Israel is defying the United Nations because UNRWA was created by the United Nations for a purpose. And the purpose is to take care of the Palestinian refugees until such a day that the refugee problem is solved. Today, the refugee problem has been exacerbated, it hasn't been solved. And coming up and saying that UNRWA cannot operate, it's not just attacking UNRWA, it's attacking the United Nations system. Today, there's also a law in Israel that says you cannot talk about the two state solution. If the whole world endorses the two state solution as a viable solution, and one of the parties which is concerned with the two states says, you can't talk about it, then how would the world continue speaking about it? And we yet to see the world saying, you know what, this is what we want, and this is what all the international community agrees on, and this is what we need to see implemented. Today, we see them changing the names in occupied Palestinian territory. They have decisions stating that you cannot use the term West Bank anymore. You have to say Judea and Samaria. This is the biblical name of the area. And again, that's extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous because the Palestinian Israeli problem is not a religious problem. It's a problem about rights, it's a problem about geography. And can you imagine if any country says, you know what, I was somewhere 2000 years ago and I need to go back to that place? What will happen to this world? Let alone being a biblical narrative. And that biblical narrative is so dangerous that it says very clearly that the aspiration is not just the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. It is beyond that. It is going into areas of Jordan, parts of Syria, parts of Lebanon, parts of Iraq, even reaching Saudi Arabia. And Israelis today don't shy away from saying it. In the past, it was discreetly said. But today, Netanyahu showed the maps in the United Nations and said this would be the new Middle East. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the two settler ministers in this rightist government, clearly say that this is their aspiration and this is the land of Greater Israel. A country, an occupier country, is telling the world that I want to infringe on the geography of another independent country, and the world watches and listens and nods. And if you are in the state of Israel and you're governing the state of Israel, then You say, okay, if the world nods and there are no real measures to put me into account, I will continue doing whatever I'm doing because I know I can do it. And as human beings, we will do whatever we do because we know we can do it. And if we can do it, why not? On the West Bank, when we started the peace process in 1990s, in the mid 1990s, the number of illegal settlers on occupied territory in the West Bank was 150,000, the most. Today, there are 800,000 illegal settlers living in illegally erected settlements on stolen land from Palestinians in the West Bank. Again, international law is very clear about this. You cannot, as an occupier state, move or demographically change the makeup of the land that you occupy. But Israel has been doing this for the last 57 years, and more so after the peace process. And people look at us and say, you know what, you've started this peace process, but what did this peace process bring us? Nothing. Nothing except more grab of land by the Israelis, increased number of settlements, increased number of settlers, more violence by settlers. Today, these settlers are all armed. We live amongst armed settlers, and these armed settlers can do anything at any time, and they are rarely held to account, rarely taken to court. But if we retaliate in any means, even with a stone, we are detained, we're imprisoned. And we can be imprisoned by what is called an administrative detention, which is also illegal, for 6 months, subject to another 6 month renewal and subject to renewals on successive terms until eternity. And some people have been detained under administrative detention for years and years now. And that's also illegal. Today, we have 10,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli detention camps. Amongst them are some 350 minors, and 21 women still are in detention camps in Israel in the most horrible, horrible conditions. And we've seen footage coming out of those detention camps of neglect, dirt, no food, no water, most unhygienic conditions. And that's also against international law and against international humanitarian law. Settler terrorism is on the rise. These settlers terrorize us day in and day out. They bombard our towns and cities and wherever we are, and they can burn trees, burn cars, burn homes. And sometimes they are guarded by the Israeli military. And what do we have to retaliate? Nothing. We're not armed. We're not armed people. And dare any one of us retaliate, then the response from the military and the settlers is unimaginable. But can you put yourselves instead of us in our shoes? What would you do if you have been living under these conditions for the last 57 years? When you fear for your children going to school, when you're a pregnant woman giving birth at a checkpoint, when you're a university professor humiliated at a checkpoint and denied moving from one area to the other, what would you do if you see no life, you see no future for yourself or your children? When the unemployment is on the rise, what would you do? Would you just embrace occupation and say, you know what, we have to accept it, uh, we can do nothing about it? No, we're human beings and we have dignity. And because of that, we fight and we struggle against oppression and we struggle against occupation. And it's our right to do so. But again, we want to do it non-violently. Non-violently because we believe that someday, somehow, international law will do fairness to people under occupation, and the international community will rise to the moment. But we're still waiting for that moment to come. Today, we have calls for displacement of Palestinians, further displacement of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And I'm sure you know what came out from the Trump administration, President Trump himself, on the displacement, but then it has been toned down because of the unified stance, individually and collectively, by all Arab states, saying you cannot do that. You cannot displace 2.3 million people. But the mere fact that this has been uttered, it really reflects hegemony of the powerful over the weaker, over the strong over the people who have been oppressed for so long. And imagining that you can just say, I want to displace 2.3 million without thinking that, this is quite problematic. It's quite problematic not only for the people you want to displace, but for the neighboring countries because you're infringing on the integrity of those states. And you might be destabilizing the whole area. You might be jeopardizing the security in the whole area. But today, um, as I said, the messages have been toned down, but it doesn't mean that they have been completely off the table. They might surface at any time, and we need to be quite cautious and keep our eyes open. Enough of what is happening today, because I don't want to sound as a victim. I mean, yes, we are victims, and we have been victims for so many years, but we have stamina, and we have resilience, and we have power, and we have determination, and we want to liberate ourselves, period. We're not asking for anything more than what international law gives us. And let me remind that as Palestinians, we have conceded to having our state on 22% of historic Palestine, which means we have recognized the state of Palestine, the state of Israel, sorry, on 78% of historic Palestine. That is a biggest concession made by Palestinians. And just imagine if you were in a country and you had to concede 78% of your country and accept having your state on the 22%. We have accepted that. And we have recognized Israel on the 78%. This is not a joke. I mean, we have recognized Israel on 78%. It is registered at the United Nations. The whole world witnessed it. We are still to be recognized by Israel on the 22%. And the 22% is non negotiable. I mean, if we want a viable state of Palestine, that's the least that would be palatable by Palestinians. We would continue to reject uprooting. We will never accept to be uprooted or to become refugees again. We have experienced refuge in the past. We will not do it again because we know very well that displacement and refuge to the Palestinians means no return back home. And we won't do it. And I think the Gazans have said it very clearly. They said it when the ceasefire took effect and people were interviewed. All of them said, we would rather live on the rubble than be displaced somewhere else because they know what is happening to the other refugees. We reject normalization of unlawful practices. What Israel, as an occupier state, is doing is unlawful. And we will continue to say that it is unlawful because that's what it is. And we cannot say otherwise. And we would like the whole world to say the same. We will continue our diplomatic efforts to enable our authority, to enable our state to materialize the state. We would continue to say we want to maintain ceasefire, but the prospects are very bleak, especially after what happened last night. We want to open the crossings so that humanitarian assistance starts moving into the Gaza and the West Bank, because the West Bank also is suffering. But today, the Gazans are starving, and 80% are under famine. And this, if this doesn't move the world, I don't know what does. If a genocide by killing 50,000 people, injuring 110,000, with 20, 30,000 under the rubble, God knows how many more, does not move the world, what would? What would? Is this the world order that countries have worked for after World War II? Do we want all that to crumble? Because this is exactly what is happening. This world order that was created so that nothing like what happened in World War II happens again is crumbling. Is crumbling with a very hegemonic attack by, as I said, the more powerful. Um, Today we have several moves on that front. I'm not sure if you heard about the Arab summit that was held earlier this month on the 4th of March. And the Arab summit endorsed the plan for the relief and the reconstruction of Gaza. The plan was also presented at the OIC, and the OIC has also endorsed it. So today we have 57 Arab and Islamic countries that have endorsed the plan. The plan was also looked upon favorably, and we've got statements from various countries around the globe saying that they are also in favor of the plan. The plan will be presented to President Trump within the next few days or weeks at the most, so that we can move on. We're preparing for the International Peace Conference mid-year that has been spearheaded by France and Saudi Arabia. And the theme of that conference will be recognition and, um, again, the materialization of the state. There's the global coalition on the materialization of the two-state solution, and this is working on the track of what steps are needed to actually materialize the state. We're also implementing reform programs within the Palestinian government to enable and empower the government to be more effective and efficient in conducting its operations. We're also working on our own national unity, because if we want to present ourselves to the world, we need to be unified as one government, one weapon, one administration, one law. And that is also, we've taken the steps, but we're still far from it. And we will be conducting our elections soon when the environment is conducive, because the whole world is asking about elections. And we tell them we're under genocide and we're under a very abnormal condition. Let's take care of what is happening right now. And when the time is more conducive, we will talk about the things that we can do later. But today there are immediate needs, and the immediate needs are relief, opening the crossings, and feeding people, and stopping this genocidal, atrocious war. So, what do we want from the international community? We would like the international community to support our legal and political rights. You all have read international law. You know what international law says, and we want the world to just go by international law and have everyone comply with international law. Israel has not complied with one resolution, whether through the General Assembly or Security Council resolution. And there are hundreds of General Assembly resolutions on Israel Palestine and tens of resolutions through the Security Council, and Israel has not complied with one resolution. And all students of political science, and I'm sure yourselves, uh, can verify that. If there's one resolution complied with by Israel, please tell me which one that is. so that I can take it as, as something to look forward to, and ask Israel to replicate on other resolutions. We want countries to move on with the global coalition. We want countries to comply with the ICJ ruling that said very clearly that um, this occupation is illegal and it needs to be dismantled within a year. It can't be clearer than that. This is the highest legal international court that said this, and this statement is irreversible. It's not like, let's rediscuss and you can reverse it next year. No, it's irreversible, and it set the tone on the illegality of the occupation. Now, would it be dismantled in 1 year, 2 years? I don't know. Let's hope. But we need to see steps towards its dismantlement. We need to support UNRWA. UNRWA is the lifeline of Palestinian refugees, and its services cannot be stopped because the services cannot be shouldered by any other entity but UNRWA. And UNRWA cannot be erased, and it can stop its services once the refugee problem is finished. We want countries to assist us with the relief and reconstruction efforts and move on with the funders conference, the peace conference this summer. We want countries to help us with full membership at the UN. And we want countries to ban settlement products. Anything coming out of illegal settlements produced by illegal settlers, anything that is emboldening the occupation should be banned. And that's also in line with international law. We want to start a political track. We want countries like Brazil, weighty countries in their own region and globally, to help in pushing towards a genuine political track, because only a genuine political track will bring us closer to peace and closer to the two-state solution. The two-state solution is still the most viable solution until now, because that is the only solution that takes care of the rights of the people of the area. There are other solutions. Of course, there is the one state solution, but will Israel accept a one state solution? It is hardly accepting a two state solution. Would it accept a one state solution? It might, by annexing everything and continuing to defy international law and creating a stronger apartheid state. Now, today we are living under this apartheid state, but it will be a formal apartheid state in the 21st century, where there is absolutely no place for apartheid. I mean, apartheid is behind our backs, but today it is still exercised in Israel. I will stop here, and I'm very happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fahim, for your very, very sad and accurate description of what's going on in Palestine. We know that it's been ongoing for the last almost 50 years. And I do not feel like we'll achieve the two-state solution, but I think it's something that we must try. Would like to open the floor.
And here and here.
Good afternoon, Madam Minister. First and foremost, I would like to extend our gratitude for your presence here in Brazil and for your insightful lecture. In this regard, I would like to ask, what is Palestine's diplomatic strategy to gain broader international recognition as a sovereign state.
I'll take a few questions.
مساء الخير. شكرا. سيدتي أحسن أكبيكن. أنا ماتيوس. Now I will speak in English. I would like to understand in what extent the UNRWA's ban is affecting Palestinian refugees, and how Brazil can help in this process for refugees to get back to Palestine.
Mhm.
Ambassadors, Dr. Sahin, Masanahai, and Eduardo. I want to first thank you for most welcome lectures, especially in those dark times that Palestinians live in, the escalation from Israel, the support from Donald Trump, and the ridiculous commentaries that they this time. My question is about uh, with all those attacks on Gaza and those that rise of Netanyahu to erase Hamas from the map, the fact is that after all that, Hamas still has an important position on that region. And my question for the Palestinian Authority is how you conceive a vision for the Gaza Strip after all of this destruction has gone, and what part Hamas could play on that or cannot play.
Mhm. I'll answer the three questions and then we'll take another round. I'll start with the UNRWA question. Well, the ban does affect UNRWA operations because now UNRWA cannot bring in any equipment, it cannot bring in any of the tools it needs. Some countries are not paying UNRWA, so the funding of UNRWA is dwindling. So, in one way or another, the work of UNRWA is very much affected. And today, its centers in the refugee camps have been bombarded. So, not only they don't have the funding or the material, but their centers have been bombarded, and many of their staff have been imprisoned. So it is affecting UNRWA big time. How Brazil can help in bringing back refugees? I think the whole world can say that there is Resolution 194, and Resolution 194 stipulates that refugees have the right to return home. But we're so many years after 194, and we have to look at this realistically. What we need as Palestinians, first and foremost, is a recognition that there has been a refugee problem perpetrated by the occupation and the division. That's number one. Acknowledgement is number one step towards solving the problem. And number two is finding solutions. In most of the presentations I have, people ask, but when you say the right of return, then if you have 8 million Palestinian refugees outside of Palestine, then does that mean that all of a sudden they will be at the borders of Israel asking to enter Israel? Realistically speaking, no, because that would not be the case. Because these refugees, part of them have been naturalized in their country of refuge. Part of them will become naturalized in the country of their refuge. Part of them are already in the United States, Australia, London, you name it, and they're prospering there. And it's been 2 generations, 3 generations. These people will not come back. Who will come back, and rightly so, are refugees who have been living in extremely dire situations in refugee camps in Lebanon, in Syria, who have become refugees not once, not twice, and displaced 3 times, 4 times. we have an ethical and a moral obligation towards those refugees. These refugees need to find a place, and they need to find a place either in Israel proper, and yes, in Israel, because Israel has a responsibility to take some of those refugees, and some will come back to the state of Palestine, where they most probably have family members. But first and foremost, we need to acknowledge the right to return, and it's up to them to say where I want to return. On the question on the diplomatic strategy to gain sovereignty, of course, we're working on multilateral levels and bilateral levels. We're working on the official level and with public diplomacy, and we're doing whatever it takes to convince the various states on the, the compliance with international law, the importance of the two states, and so forth. We can do a lot more, but we are always on the international level faced with the veto, the very famous veto. I mean, whatever we do at the UN, there's always the confrontation with the veto. And until we free ourselves from that veto, the situation will continue to be very difficult internationally. On erasing Hamas from the map and the vision for the Gaza Strip. The vision for the Gaza Strip the day after for the Palestinians is quite clear. The entity that has the legal and the administrative mandate over the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory is the PLO. So the most suited entity to take over in Gaza is the state of Palestine, represented by the PLO and its arm, the government. So, what needs to be done today is to empower the government to enter Gaza and start working in Gaza. This doesn't mean that we have to sit idle and wait until that happens, because even today we have our staff working in the Gaza Strip. We had people, most of them were paid by the Palestinian Authority, even throughout the rule of Hamas in Gaza and when Hamas was under the siege. And they continue to do work in the health sector, the education sector, the social welfare sector, in water, the electricity sector, and so forth. And we can mobilize them in a more systematic manner and more, organized manner once we have more presence in Gaza. But to me, it's very simple, and it's a natural evolution that the Palestinian Authority will be empowered to take over in Gaza.
Madam Minister, Masal Khair,
Masoud.
Gabriel. My question is, you mentioned in your talk that the current world order is crumbling. And I think that the Palestinian plight clearly illustrates the limitations of current international institutions. So, given that Brazil has long been a vocal advocate of global governance reform, I think we'd all be interested in hearing from a Palestinian perspective which specific reforms would be most crucial to ensuring that multilateralism remains an effective tool for solving conflicts and ensuring the proper application of international law. Shukran jazilan.
Afwan. Huh?
Good afternoon, Madam Minister.
Mhm.
My question is specifically about the Palestinian Christian communities,
Mm.
because I believe that whenever we debate the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in Brazil and other parts of the West, there is a tendency to frame this conflict as a religious conflict between Muslims and Jews, or and therefore to somehow legitimize the plight of the Palestinians based on their religious somehow religious extremism and stuff like that. But I watch with great concern the situation of Orthodox and Catholic
Palestinian Christians in occupied territory, for example, in Bethlehem, Jerusalem, the Armenian Church, and in Gaza, where we have seen, for example, Pope Francis, who calls the church there. So I'd like to hear from you how this conflict has been affecting the Christian Palestinian community in both Palestine and Gaza and in the occupied territories of the West Bank. Thank you very much.
One question and then I'll answer.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank you for your powerful testimony. Very important for us to hear your words here today. I have a question regarding diplomatic negotiations towards a state solution. Considering how difficult the public debate has become, especially in the last few years, I'd like to know what role do back channels play in the Palestinian-Israeli dialogue?
Thank you for the questions, and they're very close to my heart because I worked at the Negotiations Affairs Department for 13 years, and I'm a Christian myself, and not only a Christian but an Armenian. So you've had it from all aspects. I'll start with the world order question. Yes, the world order is crumbling, and there needs to be current reform measures. And for example, the voting system at the UN. I mean, if one country um, brings down whatever decision, then that's quite problematic. And we've seen it not only with Palestine, but maybe with other resolutions and other countries. The Security Council makeup, the presence of the permanent states. Remember, the makeup was decided after World War II. And now we're so many years after that, and we have the rising powers of other states as well. So these are measures that need to be seriously considered at the UN if we want to continue to have the UN as the beacon and the umbrella of resolutions that ensure that there is peace and security in the world. In terms of diplomatic negotiations, there's always the direct channel and the back channels. In Palestine, I tell you, whatever channel, but we need to have a channel, whether it's the first channel, the direct official channel, or the back channel. Back channels help sometimes in testing water, and they are important in negotiations. But for Palestinians today, after so many years of negotiations, I tell you what is needed right now is the direct, genuine political path that says the framework is the two states, because by the way, the two states is not just something elusive. It's enshrined in international law, and it was dictated in the division resolution. The division resolution said two states. One state is already on the ground, Israel, and now we need to materialize the second state. So the framework is there. What needs to be done is to say this would be the mechanism, these would be the accountability measures, and this is the time framework. We cannot continue just negotiating for the sake of negotiating forever. And we've learned our lessons from negotiating with no time frame. Now the time is for a time frame, a clear path on negotiations, and something that will take us to end of occupation. Now, on the Christian communities, yes, it's not a religious conflict, it's a conflict of rights. It has nothing to do with religion. Palestinians have political rights and they have rights to the land, full stop. And this is why we are governed by international law and nothing else. On the Christian issue, we have been monitoring incitement against Christians for the last 5 years. And I can say with a lot of confidence that this incitement has been on the rise. And we have cases documented, case by case. And we can send you a report on this documentation with the updating year by year for you to look at. And the incitement comes in various forms. We often hear that, you know what, you're Christian Palestinians and you're privileged because you're sure getting much better treatment than others. And I always say, on the contrary, we're not getting any better treatment. We're all Palestinians, full stop. And if you're a Palestinian, then you are subjected to the same forms of incitement and the same forms of humiliating and violation measures. On the Christian aspect, I want to mention just few of the ways that incitement is rising on the Christians. Today, we see desecration of cemeteries. Settlers or wrongdoers going in and just breaking the tombs, crosses on the tombs, and so forth. Burning of churches, breaking whatever is in the church, the statues of Jesus Christ, Virgin Mary, and so forth. Anti-Christian graffiti on the walls. And I don't want to say what is written on the walls, you can imagine. Attacking people wearing crosses. Can you imagine if you attack anyone on the street wearing a Star of David? But we see that all the time. It's not only people like me who would want to wear a cross, it's attacking priests who wear crosses, snatching the crosses, disrupting Christian celebrations, imposing taxes on church property. And we know that church property is not taxable. And now they're imposing this taxation. And if this taxation passes, it means that these churches will go bankrupt. And if these churches will go bankrupt, then the Israelis will put their hands on the church property, and the church property will be turned to whatever the occupier state wants. Taking over church property, the Armenian case, and the attempts to take over the prime property that has been embezzled by the settlers, attacking Christian stores. Um, what we see today, we have not seen 20 years ago, but we see it today on a daily basis. One of the most disturbing incitements against Christians is the spitting on Christians. If you wear a cross and Jewish fanatics are passing by, they would spit at you. When they pass by a church, they would spit at the church. Or when a priest is moving, they would spit at the. And when we protested, we complained about this. And the churches, the heads of the churches in Jerusalem said, you know what, you can't continue doing this because we cannot do the same to you. You need to find a solution. You know what the answer was? The answer by two of the ministers in the Israeli government, they said, you know what, why are you making a big deal out of this? This is an old Jewish tradition. And, if we do it, it's part of the tradition. So we need, as Christians, to accept it because it is part of the tradition. The threat of erasing Christian presence is imminent, and we see it by the day. There is dwindling number of Christians in the Holy Land in general, not because of of Palestinian attacks against Christians, as we hear it elsewhere. Because wherever I go, I hear, but the Muslims are against you, aren't they? I say no, because the Muslim, the Palestinian Muslim, and the Palestinian Christian, like myself, are together fighting the Israeli occupation. It is the Israeli occupation that is forcing people out, Christians and Muslims alike, because Christians and Muslims want a better future for their children. And Christians are educated, they have family elsewhere. It's much easier for them to move. And when a Christian family moves, you see the gap. But when a Muslim family moves, like if you have 100 Muslim families and 10 families move, you still have the 90 families and it doesn't show. But if you have 10 Christian families and one family moves, you see the vacuum. Today, the fear is grave on having no Christians in Palestine in 20 to 30 years maximum. And this means that the cradle of Christianity is devoid of the first Christians. And is this what the world wants? No, of course not. And we need to fight that. We need to ensure that there is always a Christian presence in Palestine because that is part of the beauty of the Palestinian makeup. It's part of the mosaic of Palestine, and it's part of the existence we had 100 years ago. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together. They coexisted together. They ate together. They had stores together. They were neighbors. And we need to go back to that presence.
Good afternoon, Madam Minister. My name is Felipe. My question concerns the relationship between the PLO and Hamas at this moment, and in what concerns the negotiations for the post-war Gaza. So, as we all know, since 2007, the PLO has not had a presence in the territory in Gaza, and elections have not been held since 2006. Um, you have brought up the issue of reconstruction and the fact that a meeting was held in Cairo. The Arab League has agreed, so far as I understand, that Arab countries and other countries will raise the money needed for reconstruction. And as I understand, the reconstruction efforts will be taken by the PLO. Um, I would like you to please explain how this dynamic will play out, whether we have a lasting ceasefire or a peace agreement between Israel and Hamas. In other words, how the Palestinian government will undertake the reconstruction efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Of course, every Palestinian wants the ceasefire to be maintained, and we all pray for that because we don't want to go back to the genocidal war. And we've seen what happened only last night with 1,000 killed or injured. So, any calls for maintaining the ceasefire are very much welcomed from the Arab countries and the world at large. In terms of the elections, yes, elections were not held, but for a reason. Elections cannot be, yeah, we're not living in Brazil or Switzerland or London. We're living under occupation and our country is severed. We live in three different enclaves. We live on the West Bank, on the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. And unless we can do elections on the entirety of Palestine, then there's no point of doing elections. We cannot do elections on the West Bank without East Jerusalem or the Gaza Strip, or do elections on the Gaza Strip without the other two parts. Israel is not allowing us to do elections in East Jerusalem, although this is another violation of the Oslo Agreement, because in the Oslo Agreement, we were supposed to do elections in East Jerusalem because it's part and parcel of the occupied Palestinian territory. But since this vision, the expansionist colonialist vision of East Jerusalem being part and parcel of Israel today as the eternal capital, the unified capital of Israel, is preventing us from doing elections. And we have done elections in the mid 90s and 2006. And we've done the elections under the monitoring of the international community. And we were given, top grades on being able to do the elections and do them well. And we can do them again, but we cannot do them without East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is very symbolic and it's a political statement for us. If we accept to do elections without East Jerusalem, then we're telling the Israelis that it is fine. It is, part and parcel of your country, and it is not. So politically, we cannot do that. It's not about the logistics of doing the elections. It's about actually being able to elect in Jerusalem as a Palestinian. So the calls for doing elections elsewhere, putting the boxes in the periphery of Jerusalem will not work because politically this will not be accepted. But I can assure you that President Abbas said we will do elections once the situation has stabilized and the environment is convenient for us to do the elections. On the PLO and Hamas. Look, Hamas is not just 50, 60, 1,000 fighters. Hamas is an ideology. And just like you have the right, the center, the left in any country, and in Israel you have the Ben Gvir and the Smotrich and the likes who are on the very right and they have their own ideologies. Can we tell Israel, you know what? You either have a state without these people, or we will not do any dealings with your state. You can't do that. They are part and parcel of the Israeli community, and Hamas is part and parcel, the members, they're part and parcel of our community. However, if Hamas wants to be part of the politics of Palestine, it has to join the PLO. And if it joins the PLO, then it has to accept the mandate of the PLO and accept all the agreements signed by the PLO and act as a political party just like any other political party. But Hamas cannot continue as a separate entity with its own laws, its own rules, its own administration, and its own weapon. So if it wants to come back to the Palestinian entirety, it has to act accordingly. On the plan of with the Arab countries, the plan will take 6 years to implement. The first 6 months are on strictly on relief, and that will cost $3 billion. The second phase will go over 2 years, and it will cost $20 billion. The third phase will be over 2.5 years, and it will cost $23 billion. Altogether, $53 billion. But the construction will be done mostly with Palestinian hands. There will be an international organization that will oversee how the whole thing will be functioning. Egypt will have a big say in it, but the Palestinian Authority will be first and foremost doing the monitoring of the whole thing. And there will be an independent committee the first 6 months that will follow up on the relief efforts until the time comes that the government is empowered to slowly and incrementally take over. So there are within the plan ideas on how to move on the plan.
One last question. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for one last question. Thank you for your speech. In face of the steadfast fight of the Palestinian people for their rights, which is nothing but admirable, I would like to ask, do you foresee in the crumbling of the Western order, in the cracks and the shifts that are going on right now, finally, new chances, new opportunities for a reward for the fight and the amazing endurance of your people through all these decades?
Thank you for the kind words. I hope so. In every disaster, we need to see an opportunity to keep our sanity. And as Palestinians, we know that the best because we can't resort to hopelessness and helplessness. And this is what keeps us moving. We always try to see that there might be good coming out of all this darkness. And we truly hope that the world realizes that for the sake of peace and security, the rights of the Palestinians have to be taken into consideration and they have to be respected. Any peace that is dictated on the Palestinians, a so called peace that does not include those rights and the parameters we've talked about, will not bring peace. It will not bring peace to the Palestinians, nor the Israelis, nor the region, nor probably the world at large. So if the world looks at it in these terms and looks at the area in a strategic manner, strategically placing Israel as a state, as a normal state in the area. Because in the final analysis, if Israel wants to live in the region, it needs to act as a normal state. And as a normal state, it needs to respect international law. It needs to respect its neighbors. It cannot wage wars on its neighbors. It needs to understand that they have a dignified neighbor that is in pain and is entitled to the 22% as given by international law. And then then it can ask to be normalized, to have normal relations with the area. But if you have something that is abnormal, asking to be considered normal in the area, it cannot be done because the abnormal stays abnormal and the normal stays normal. Until the abnormal becomes normal, it cannot be normalized in the area. So we need to think of the Middle East strategically, and we want Israel to prosper. We have recognized Israel. We want it to continue to prosper, but for it to prosper, its neighbors need to prosper as well. Israel's prosperity cannot be on the account of the pain and the suffering of its neighbors. And one of them is the Palestinians and Palestine.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Sahim, for the speech and for the information that you have awarded us. I think that we have all been instructed in how better to help, to aid, and to try and bring forth peace within the region. I know that it is very, very difficult. I know that it is something that both Palestine and Israel have to strive for together. But it seems that divisions are ever widening, and I really don't know what to say, but I think you have to keep fighting and persevere. Thank you very, very much. I would like to ask our students to go to the panel so that we can take some photographs. And
Thank you.